If you're someone who's working out regularly or who follows fitness influencers over on social media, you will have heard of creatine monohydrate. And my special guest today, Dr. Darren Candow, is one of Canada's leading researchers on this supplement. Darren is a full professor and graduate dean, studies and research in the Faculty of Kinesiology and Health Studies at the University of Regina. This is where he supervises the Aging, Muscle, and Bone Health Laboratory and serves on the editorial review board for the Journal of Aging and Physical Activity, the Journal of International Society of Sports Nutrition, and Biogerontology. He's been on many popular podcasts and my go-to when I have any questions on creatine. Welcome to the podcast, Dr. Darren Candow. So, Darren, thanks so much again for joining us back at Move Daily Talks. Your last podcast with us was our most viewed. So,
Oh, wow. Okay.
yeah, it was like in the whole year. So,
Okay.
obviously, this is a topic of conversation people are super interested
Okay.
in. I was just saying to you before, this year has been crazy for you.
Mhm.
Like,
Yeah.
the interest in creatine has
Right.
just skyrocketed.
It
What?
has, yeah.
Yeah. Why do you think that is?
It's my guess is because it's just gone away from just exercise performance. I think
Right.
everybody on the planet is trying to live longer, free of disease, healthier, better sleep, recovery. And ever since COVID, I've really noticed a lot of people are putting a lot more focus on health, obviously for good reasons. And creatine's exploded in that way from not just exercise, but pretty much from a global health perspective. We're looking at children, pregnancy to frail elderly, to disease states. So I think that's the big explosion. And the other good thing is we're getting a lot more evidence-based research out there to dispel a lot of myths. There's a
Mm.
lot of questions, a lot of false information out there that I think have caused people to be very hesitant. And the more, this is a great opportunity. The more evidence-based research we get out there, it can really encourage people to at least consider it. And we try to focus on females because I think creatine was originally designed for young males getting bigger, stronger, faster, playing
Yeah.
football, whichever it is. And females respond exceptionally well. And there's a lot of benefits for essentially everybody. So I think that's the biggest reason. But getting more information out there and dispelling a lot of myths is probably at the root of the issue. Yeah.
For sure. I never, I've heard of creatine for the past
Hmm.
20 years as a trainer. I
Yeah.
never took it myself up until
Hmm.
about 3 years ago. So you're right. Like
Yeah.
it's emerging in that respect. So with this last year
Yeah.
of incredible information on creatine out
Hmm.
there, recently, I've seen a few posts where
Hmm.
people are saying that popular supplement creatine might be worthless. This was a
Mm.
New York Post.
Yeah.
It says overestimated benefits. So I'd
Hmm.
love to hear
Yeah.
I'm sure you've seen some of these things kind of rising up. I'd love to
Yeah.
hear your insight onto that.
Yeah, I was a co-author on that paper,
Oh,
and it was so amazing that it's just typical. We read something, and I think what happened is the media who interviewed the primary authors in Australia simply wrote down some of the context there. So let's put it into preface. So the purpose of this, and it was all over the headlines, is we simply wanted to see could creatine during the first week before people started exercising increase anything in the body. And it goes to its physiology. Creatine is kind of osmotic. It likes to take water and travel with it. And so one of the big issues when we do a lot of research studies, people hear about lean body mass. Now, the caveat with lean body mass is it's not just muscle. There's a lot of other things in there, primarily water retention. And so since creatine is osmotic, it likes to take water and shift it throughout the body. All this study simply showed was that the first week, taking a little bit lower dose than normal of creatine supplementation increased lean body mass without training. So logically, if you're not exercising and lean body mass went up, it's not muscle. It's likely that a main factor there is water retention. And this was really important because a lot of researchers, we don't consider this. For example, when we measure creatine compared to a placebo over maybe, say, 6 weeks, sometimes creatine will increase lean body mass. But the question is, was it during the initial stages? And if it is only water. So all we simply show is creatine increases lean body mass, and maybe a higher dose might be needed to get some statistical results compared to placebo with training. But the big thing that was a bit surprising to me, this is one study. there's probably 30 or 40 others that simply show creatine and resistance training increases lean body mass and increases small amounts of muscle growth as well. So to say it's worthless is completely false. If anything, it just simply showed that the mechanisms of creatine are valid. It does increase water retention, but primarily inside the muscle. And from a mechanistic perspective, that turns on a lot of the magic of creatine. So people saw this, and I said, "Whoa, whoa, whoa! You're missing the context. It's actually a beneficial result." Yeah.
It's so easy for us to miss the context in
Yes.
posts on social. Like that
Mhm.
probably drives you nuts
Yeah.
because I see that too. And people
Yes.
just in the comments chime in,
Yeah.
and it's very confusing then. But yes, context goes a long
Right.
way, folks. Again, with the supplement gaining
Mhm.
popularity,
Yeah.
there are a few different types. And I'd love for you
Mhm.
to just explain to our audience what is micronized creatine,
Mhm.
just regular creatine monohydrate,
Yeah.
hydrochloride. And then there's some blends that we see
Yep.
together now. So which is the best for us? And yeah, is there a place for any of these other ones in there for us?
Yeah, so I think the root is make sure it's monohydrate base. And then these ultra micronized creatine, it's kind of like taking ground beef and keeping processed it. It goes from regular to lean to extra lean.
Okay.
Some of the reasons that companies will do this, and the best one is in Germany, Allschem, they actually have a new product called Creavitalis, and it's really, really micronized because it's it increases the solubility in water. So some people don't like the little bit of grittiness at the end of their or glass or whichever it is, and it seems to be very, very palatable. So the more micronized it is, it seems to have a little bit easier effect on the GI tract. It's still the efficacy is exactly the same as regular creatine monohydrate, but that has to be the base there. So when you see ultra micronized or ultra filtered, it's just the processing of it. But again, the first thing I would suggest to the viewers is make sure it's creatine monohydrate. You bring up hydrochloride, creatine malate, all of these. These are different marketed forms of the creatine molecule added with different salts or ions to substantially convince or at least get the person to say, wow, this creatine might be better than the original, most people say boring white powder monohydrate. And that's all it is. It's marketing. Some people say, wow, it doesn't cause a lot of GI tract irritation when I take it. Other people says, wow, I heard it increases the bioavailability. I'm okay if people say I take this type of creatine because it doesn't cause any GI issues and I'm fine with that. As long as it's creatine in the blood, a
Mm,
lot of times that when you take these marketed forms of creatine, we do not know if they can get through your stomach lining and small intestine. And when it gets into the blood, is it actually creatine? So about 4 years ago, Rick Kreider put an elegant review paper looking at the hundreds of different types of creatine marketed, and monohydrate was by far the most superior. So I think for your viewers, if you're interested in taking a new brand of creatine, be very cautious that we don't know the safety. We
mhm.
certainly don't know the efficacy compared to monohydrate, but whatever form works for the person is great. None will be better. Whatever they're saying, it just doesn't work that way unless it is the creatine molecule there. So I only look at creatine monohydrate in our lab. We use Creapure and Creavialis from Alzchem. It's third-party tested. And if anybody's considering or taking creatine and they're noticing any adverse effects, it's likely they're taking too much initially,
Yeah.
or they're probably not taking it in maybe the right frequency or dosing. So those just take a little bit more work to do with the dosing protocol. But I put all my stock into monohydrate because that's what all the evidence suggests. Yeah.
Okay. Wonderful. Can creatine provide muscle benefits without exercise? So we know that there are a lot of seniors who are
Mhm.
taking it. My parents are taking it themselves as well. Mom exercises diligently, dad doesn't as much.
Yeah.
But yeah, what are the benefits that we could see without exercise?
Yeah, they've actually evolved this year, which is kind of interesting and great question. So yes, the answer to your question is yes, it's a small body of evidence to suggest without structured exercise, creatine can provide muscle and actually brain health benefits. Now, let's focus on muscle. They're very, very small. What we typically see is in older adult populations, it can improve strength, endurance, and a little bit of recovery. It's been shown in young individuals as well, but those individuals are usually weight training on their own. So it can have application from a muscle performance perspective. We don't see any bone benefits without exercise.
Mm.
And we're actually starting a new review on creatine for disuse or immobilization. You think of frailty or individuals in long-term care facilities that might have application. So there is some small muscle benefits without exercise. Now, the interesting thing is when we get above the neck, there is some cognitive and memory benefits when you look at the small number of studies without structured exercise as part of the intervention. And then, of course, there's been a study now in children with concussion and TBI, and it
Mm.
has some beneficial effects there. So it's very interesting. It's evolved that creatine can increase bioenergetics, primarily in the brain. So from the neck up, you don't necessarily need structured exercise. In the muscle, we'd love you to exercise. That's where about 95% of the benefits come. But to answer your question, you can get some small, very select benefits.
Sure. So you say from the neck up, so our brain,
Mm.
obviously, what would the dosage be then
Yeah.
to attain those benefits?
Yeah, when this is interesting, from muscle without exercise and actually cognition, it seems to be pretty high. The best studies seem to be about at least 10 grams a day or even higher, all the way up to this loading phase, typically 20 grams a day. And that's typically the most robust lines of evidence that we used to say, 2 to 3 to 5 grams a day was great. That seems to only be for skeletal muscle. When we're looking at a whole body perspective, we typically need more. And I'm in the camp of I take 10 grams at least a day. I divide that up into two smaller dosages, but the best brain benefits in the clinical trials that have been done in small amounts seem to be 20 grams a day for a short period of time or a little bit higher amounts. There was one study in young adolescent females with clinical depression, and it was a very elegant study of the Utah, and they looked at 2 versus 4 versus 10 grams of creatine. Although it was a small sample and there was no differences in depressive scores, from a statistical perspective, the 10-gram dose doubled the amount of creatine in the brain. So the thought is if those individuals can have more creatine in the brain, which maintains energy just like our muscle, maybe when those people are stressed, I think it's sleep deprivation, jet lag, depression, anxiety, that's probably where the brain will rely on creatine for rescue. And it's one of the main reasons I've doubled my amount to at least 10 grams a day. But when I do fly overseas, I take 20 grams a day during the week before and actually take it again primarily for the cognitive effects.
So in terms of your bone health,
Hmm.
so I think I remember reading one of your papers, or maybe we talked about it on the last podcast about bone geometry. So
Yes.
it's not necessarily that it's going to increase bone mineral density, but it
Mhm.
shifts bone geometry. Could you talk
Yeah.
to us about that?
Yeah. Yeah,
Clarify.
so we thought at Hope it was going to improve bone mineral density, and that would essentially be a really good therapy for offsetting osteoporosis.
Mhm.
But at best, the collective body of evidence suggests it decreases bone mineral density loss primarily around the hip. But regarding geometry, there's been a few good randomized control trials, and we have the longest one to date. So think of like, I don't know if the viewers can see like your pen. The geometry or the strength of the bone is stronger, so it's harder to fracture. So
Mhm.
there's trabecular and cortical bone. There's different tissues within there. So the structure gets a little bit harder. It's kind of like the cement of your basement getting a little stronger, so it's a little more rigid. And that could have applications for when someone does fall. Maybe the bone will not fracture as easily. So we think this could have applications as we get older, especially, we're in Canada with icy roads. You fall. We don't want you to fracture any of the limbs, especially around the hip region. So we did show that it preserved. We don't really see an increase, but one of the things we're seeing, especially in biological females, is as we get older, with the cessation of estrogen, maybe that population might consider exercise first, and creatine is something to add into that treatment to maintain the skeleton. And we're hoping to have a lot more data with that down the road.
And was that study done in women with or without resistance training?
That was 100% with resistance training in the first pilot study.
Yeah.
And then we took it a little bit further and added in 6 days of walking to try to get to Canada's 150 minutes of physical activity and 2 years of creatine. And this is interesting. We gave about 11 grams to 12 grams a day for 2 consecutive years. And it did have favorable effects on increasing lean body mass, gait performance, and it helped increase bone strength or maintain bone preservation. And there was no adverse effects compared to placebo, no adverse effects on the liver or kidney as well. So that's very, very important.
Does the dose have to be higher for bone and brain due to the fact that when you consume it,
Hmm.
your minimal dose will go to the muscle first, and then any leftover goes to the brain and bone, or how does that work?
Yeah, that's kind of the thought. We think the tissue that is demanding or in the most need of creatine will take it in the
Okay.
most, but the downfall is that the brain only has limited amount of transporters or doorways that allow it into the brain because it has the blood-brain barrier. Our muscles act like a vacuum. It senses creatine and will take in about 95%. So that's why a higher dose might have a little bit more trickling into the bone or brain when needed. Some will get excreted through something called creatinine as a metabolic waste. But our muscle is by far the biggest reservoir that will take in creatine. Anything extra would probably go to your immune system, cardiovascular system, bone, and specifically brain. Yeah.
So I take vitamin C with my iron to
Okay.
increase absorption and
Right.
bioavailability. Is there anything that we should be taking with creatine to do the same thing?
From a nutrient perspective, there's two that stand out. One is carbohydrate, and these are high
Oh,
glycemic carbohydrates like in juice. The issue, though, is that the dose shown to really cause a significant effect is quite high. I think it's
oh,
over 75 grams. And in today's population with GLPs and obesity and metabolic syndrome, and some people are still in the carbohydrate insulin hypothesis
mhm,
camp, a lot of people refrain from high glycemic sugars
right.
because they're usually linked to a lot of metabolic diseases. The good thing is protein is very insulinogenic. It actually is very beneficial for you, and combining creatine with protein gives it basically the same uptake and benefit. So I'd strongly suggest to combine creatine with protein compared to simple refined sugars if you're not an elite athlete. The nice thing is muscle contractions will allow an upregulation of creatine. So for those who exercise, creatine combination there, you should get a synergistic effect. Yeah.
I love that you said if you're not an elite athlete, because this is what I'm finding in this
Okay.
whole circle and conversation is that so many of the protocols that we're hearing on social media
Mhm.
are for the ultimate optimization of health, right? It's like
Right.
the exact process that you should do if you want to be the best.
Hmm.
And I think so many, well, I look at a lot of women my age and we see that we're like, I got to do this. I got to do that. I should be doing this,
Yes.
right? And it sometimes we just have to go back to the basics and not get so caught up in all the
Hmm.
exact protocols,
Yes.
right? Because we're not athletes, we're just everyday average women who just want to do their best. But
Right.
we can get hung up on all of that,
Hmm.
don't you think?
Oh, 100%. It's I mean, we could talk about carbohydrates from the elite athlete to the everyday individual. And most people don't know this, but a typical weight training session does not do anything to your glycogen stores. Like you really got to pound the body for a long period of time at high intensities. And if you're doing 10 seconds of work with 3 minutes of rest, like you don't need to be jamming in tons of carbohydrates post exercises. And I think some people see an elite athlete saying, I'm
Yeah.
taking, 500 grams of carbohydrates, and then they find if they're running a marathon and training, and the average person says, geez, I go to the gym 2 days a week, 40 minutes a session. Do I need all this? And there can be a very, there's so much mess out there. It's really hard to cut through the spin. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, we do rely on social media, which I still think is a great opportunity to get information out there. But there's a lot of information that, to be honest, is almost criminal when you think it's some of the messages
Mhm.
that are getting portrayed and there's no evidence behind it. I feel so bad when people buy things and they're like, "What about this?" I'm
Mhm.
like, "You don't know if it's going to hurt you. There's nothing to say that that's going to work," and it's a little disturbing in some circumstances. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, it can be. How about caffeine? So we talked about,
Mm,
yes, you said protein, carbohydrates can go
yeah.
well. A lot of women, people like to start their day with coffee with creatine. What are your thoughts on combining those two for bioavailability?
Yeah, so I've changed my answer a little bit on this to make it a little bit more contextual. So we think that the dose of the molecule of caffeine, so not coffee or tea, but the dose of the molecule might be the biggest factor when it potentially interferes with creatine. When you look at the small body of research, 250 milligrams of caffeine, and usually in the studies it's caffeine powder, seems to interfere with creatine's ability for muscle relaxation. It has no big effects on muscle growth or things like that, but muscle relaxation is an indicator of performance.
Hmm.
But when you look at the studies that used a little bit lower dosages, all the way up to 250 milligrams, it doesn't seem to have that much of an interference effect. So I think the good news is the average small coffee, medium coffee, and even a large would be under 250 milligrams of caffeine. So you can put your creatine in there. I don't see any reason why they would interfere. We do know the pharmacokinetics of caffeine and creatine is not the factor. It seems to have something to do with more calcium at our cell level. But if you're taking massive doses of caffeine with creatine and you're not noticing an effect, it could be that they're blunting each other just from a muscle performance perspective.
Is creatine an anti-inflammatory intervention?
It definitely has all the properties. Now, this primarily comes from high stress or rodent models, and we've actually seen that it decreases markers of inflammation post-exercise in humans, marathon and triathlon. And in the rodent model, actually has been shown to decrease oxidative stress. So, based on the current body of evidence, yes, it does fall in that anti-inflammatory property or category. That's probably why it has such great recovery aspects.
I was just going to ask that next question. What about in injury or surgery? Would people do well to take a dose? And then if so, how long do they have needed,
Right.
should they have been taking it a week before, or can they start right after their surgery, or what's the protocol for that?
Yeah, there hasn't been a lot of promise in these, post ACL surgery or things like that. But the idea is if maybe you would take creatine before surgery, almost like a prehabilitation stage, get the muscle as strong as possible, and then it might sort of speed up recovery from an anti-catabolic perspective. But that's an area of research that needs to be there, a lot bigger sample size. But the theory is that it would substantially have some application for that. Yeah.
Okay. There are concerns, anytime I post anything on creatine, there are people chiming in the comments. What about cancer? What about
Yes.
kidney
Yep. hmm
stones? What if I, have had dialysis? Let's talk
hmm
about a few of those
Okay.
issues here. Let's start with the cancer one. The big
Yeah.
C, can
Yeah.
creatine cause cancer?
Yeah, I was just in Germany about 2 months ago, and one of the biggest areas was on the anti-cancer properties of creatine, and we put out a big paper, part two, myths and misconceptions, and Dr. Mark Tarnopolsky from McMaster University, one of the world's leading creatine researchers, led that section, and it currently the recommended dosage just has anti-cancer properties, where it's anti-catabolic and anti-inflammatory. It does not seem to exacerbate any of the tumor or growth. There's been a couple super physiological studies in rodents where they gave a massive dose that would actually unfeasible for humans, and it caused some cancerous cells to potentially be activated. But we're not seeing any augmentation or increase in any of the malignancies or cancer. If anything, it has anti-cancer properties. And for those who had cancer, it seems to maintain or increase lean body mass to get them back from a rehabilitation perspective, very similar to stroke rehabilitation.
Isn't that just always the case, is that the
Mhm.
dose is the poison, right?
Yes.
So if
Yep.
you're taking more than anyone would ever
Right.
dream of taking, then
That's right.
sure, maybe, yeah. Okay, what about what about kidney health? So what if you've
Mhm.
had a history of kidney stones? Someone
Yeah.
has asked that.
Yeah.
Would you be a candidate to be taking creatine?
Yeah, so those two organs, the kidney and liver, anytime there's abnormalities, we and with any medical condition, make sure you talk to your doctor beforehand. But when you look at the totality of evidence, where creatine is actually super hydrating, we don't think it has any adverse effects at all on the kidney or liver. And people with CKU, chronic kidney disease, can actually get beneficial effects from creatine. This all stems usually when creatine is consumed and it goes into your cell, it gets trapped. But when it's metabolized, it gets metabolized as something called creatinine. And a lot of people say, oh, on my blood requisition form, there's that word creatinine. And a lot of medical practitioners use that to estimate kidney function. And if you have, excuse me, elevated creatinine, that means your GFR is not working properly. It's like your Brita filter for water. It's a little bit plugged up.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, that's not the case. It usually results in a false positive. So when you look at all the evidence, and a big paper just came out this year on the safety of creatine, there's no greater adverse effects compared to placebo. But anybody on dialysis with a single kidney, any liver impairments, please talk to your doctor, because we want to make sure creatine, if you're considering it, is right for you. We don't want to interfere with any of your medications or lifestyle interventions. Yeah.
Absolutely. What about hair loss? I know there was a new
Yeah.
paper. You knew I was going to talk about this.
Yep.
There was a new paper that you just recently
Yeah.
posted.
Yeah.
Let's talk about, I know not a lot of women maybe would think about this, although after menopause, a lot of us
Yeah.
tend to lose more hair. So if it causes hair loss, we of
Yeah.
course want to take it. So
Yeah.
talk to us about what the study found.
Yeah. So I noticed I was going bald before I started creatine when I was about 17. So
Yeah.
this study was the first finally to sort of piggyback on the rugby study, which only looked at DHT, the hormone. And in this study, Scott Forbes, Jose Antonio, Damon Astria, and Grant Tinsley, they finally actually went a little bit further. Not only did they measure free and bound testosterone and dihydroxy testosterone, the precursor for hair loss, they actually measured the follicle density and number. And after 5 grams a day without training, I believe it was for 6 or 8 weeks, I can't remember, there was no greater increase in hair follicle loss. Stimming hormones did not have an effect there as well. So it was really reassuring that there was this, probably the number one myth or question we get is dispelled. Now, people will argue, wait a minute, the rugby study did 20 grams a day. You guys did in this new study. And so we're starting to come up with the part three of looking at
Okay.
more dosing protocols with this and including biological females to see the effect there with an age perspective. But if it people say I take creatine and my hair is thinning, and then I'm like, well, what else is going on in your life? So
Exactly.
correlation is
Exactly.
not causation, exactly. And because then you would argue, well, if that's true, how come there's so many people on the planet, millions, that take creatine and they're not bald? So
Right.
if it worked, it worked. It's just like insulin and obesity. It's unbelievable. Yeah. So
Yes, or like weight gain and
yeah.
menopause. Like
Yep.
it's funny because age also is causing all of these things to happen as well, right? So
Correct.
were you going to lose your hair regardless?
Yep.
Probably. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. How about creatine increasing urination? One of the things
Mhm.
as women age, of course, is an increase in UTIs,
Yep.
and then there's this relation to if you're getting up multiple times in the middle of the night, could you trip and fall and break a femur, and then
Right. Right.
right? So there's that whole
Yep.
relationship there. So yes, does it cause an increase in urination?
Yeah, the molecule itself does not. We simply think the increase in hydration because the person is exercising or drinking a
Okay.
little bit more water is causing that. So, and again, part two of that missed paper, we don't see any physiological or stoichiometry effects of the molecule that cause urination. Again, it causes creatinine, which it gets excreted through the urine, but the molecule itself will not cause an increase in urination. We actually think it might be the increase in fluid. Yeah.
So an ideal time then to dose, if that is an issue for you, would be earlier in the day.
100%. Yep. Yep.
Okay. What about our blood pressure?
Mm.
Does creatine, does it influence blood pressure?
It can actually influence blood pressure based on the hydration or osmotic pull of the plasma or water throughout the body. But when you look
Okay.
at all the studies, there's no adverse effect on people with hypertension or systolic or diastolic blood pressure. It can have small fluctuations, which makes logical sense, but it has no detrimental effect compared to placebo.
Okay. Can creatine attenuate the symptoms of sleep deprivation? I think I
Mm.
know the answer to this since you just said you take the 20 grams when you're traveling and when you
Yeah,
have jet
yeah.
lag, but talk to us about the mechanism behind that.
Yeah, that's probably the best lines of evidence from the neck up. So there's been about 4 or 5 studies now showing that during sleep deprivation, high dose or a moderate dose can actually still maintain memory, cognition, and mental ability. And that's all the way up to 21 and even 24 hours of sleep deprivation. So I think a university students cramming for exams, night workers, whichever it is, ER doctors. So the theory is that if you have an increase in creatine, brain bioenergetics is heightened. You can reduce oxidative stress and offset the effects of sleep deprivation. And to piggyback on that, the study we published last year at the University of Idaho in young biological females, on the days they worked out and took 5 grams of creatine, they got an extra hour of sleep compared to placebo. So that's interesting. There's some evidence to suggest it improves sleep and also decreases the catastrophic effects of sleep deprivation. So something to at least consider. I have also heard a lot of people say when I take creatine, I have insomnia or I'm up all
Oh,
night. We don't know why that is. It could be something, are they taking it with a stimulant before bed? Sometimes when you take food before sleep, or whenever they're taking it. So we still don't know why some people do experience that. But from the current body of evidence, it seems to have the opposite. It seems to impair or improve the repair mechanisms to allow the person to recover quicker.
so you just alluded to a study on sleep.
Yeah.
Are there any other studies that have shown an improvement with creatine and sleep?
Not yet. They're in the works, I'm sure,
Okay.
but this was the first one to show that they got an extra hour in young biological females. But now you're starting to get the ideas of populations that really require a lot more sleep. And
Right.
the big area, I think the neck up will be the next 20 or 30 years, the big focal point for sure.
Mhm. We talked about travel there with jet lag. When you are traveling, and a lot of people will go on a vacation for a week or 2 weeks,
Yeah.
how important is it that we bring that supplement with us? And if we wanted to, could we
Yeah.
switch to capsules or gummies? And
Yeah.
is there
Yeah.
the same amount of efficacy with
Yeah.
those types of supplements?
Yeah. Those perfect questions. So a lot of people do not like to take the traditional bag of white powder wherever they're going. So this is a bit of context. If you've been taking creatine on a daily basis for at least a month, rest assured, at least your muscles are saturated, like the room is completely full. We don't know if your bone and brain is. But if you say, you know what, I'm going to go to Mexico for 3 weeks. I don't want to take my bag of white powder. It's messy. I just want to relax. It takes about 4 weeks for those levels to come back to baseline. So rest
Yeah.
assured you're going to be fine from a muscle perspective. The other cool thing is creatine is naturally found in red meat and seafood. So if
Mhm.
you are on vacation, maybe take an extra serving of red meat or seafood. That'll get more creatine in there as well. And maintaining physical activity is crucial. That helps maintain creatine stores in the muscle. We don't know the effects on bone and brain, but it's logical to have the same evidence there as possible. Yeah, so we know that there's been a few studies or reports that there's only a select few of the gummies that actually have creatine in there. So you got to make sure that whatever you're buying is a viable source.
Yeah.
But the capsules, until they anything that has a lot of liquid currently, we're not sure if it's a stable form of creatine. It has to be a sort of a solid form. I know there's a lot of companies out there thinking about ways to do this. But we don't know if the gummies can get into the blood and get into the muscle, just like powder. Those studies need to be done. But I know there's only a few studies with the gummies. Create is one of them that was on post on social media showing that some of these companies in Amazon didn't even actually have creatine in the gummies. So the consumer needs to
Oh,
do a little bit of homework to find out
wow.
a viable source there as well. Yeah.
Right. And then the dose is probably going to have to be so high too, which will cause an immense expense. I'm sure that it's just a lot
Yes.
more expensive to
Yeah.
do it that way.
Yeah.
Maybe
Exactly.
tastier, but
Yep.
yeah. I
Yeah.
mean,
I think the gummies, 1 to 1.5 grams, or the capsules, maybe 1 to 2. So to
yeah.
get that dose, you could be taking a lot. And that's why you can get these individual serving packs now of creatine or, just the powder, whichever it is. Yeah.
Oh, I haven't seen the individual
Oh,
packs.
yeah. Yeah.
That's
Five
handy.
grams. Yep, it
Oh,
is. Yep.
perfect. Um, Osteosarcopenia. So
Hmm.
osteoporosis, the reduction in our bone mineral
Yeah.
density, sarcopenia, the loss of lean muscle tissue.
Right.
Can creatine help to manage this? This is a concern for women over 50,
Yes.
right? Like this is what we're hearing. We want to avoid osteoporosis, we want to avoid
Mhm.
sarcopenia. So, I mean, from everything you said, it sounds like creatine can really help manage this.
Yeah, we're hoping, and we proposed that in a clinical paper this week or this year, that the idea is where it has beneficial effects on sarcopenia, which is the age-related reduction in strength, muscle mass, and functionality, and then piggy that with the potential benefits on bone. Could someone who's older, who has these two catastrophic conditions, it's called the geriatric giant, unfortunately, could
Hmm.
creatine in the treatment program have some benefits? No studies ever looked at it. We're hoping to do that in the future. But in theory, everything there is suggesting it at least it can't hurt. If anything, it can have some benefits with exercise, of course.
Right. Absolutely. Move daily, folks.
Yeah.
I've had a few questions from some of our members, so I'd like to pose
Okay.
those to you and
Sure.
see what you have to say here. The first one is we did talk about kidney health, but she wanted to know specifically if you had a history of kidney stones, is it
Mhm.
contraindicated for that?
We don't know.
Yeah,
All the studies we're not specifically looked at kidney stones from the hydration or the calcium deposits. We've only looked at the filtration throughout the kidney, the nephrons, and the filtration rate. So we don't know the answer to that. In that case, tell that individual to definitely speak to their nephrologist or GP to make sure. And we want to monitor that with the ultrasound for sure.
right. This lady says, my daughter, 18 years old, has chronic fatigue and is only out
Mm.
of bed from 5 p.m. to 10 p.m. Needless to say, she no
Mm.
longer exercises. Would
Okay.
creatine help her muscle loss in any way?
You know, that's an interesting question because regarding chronic fatigue, we don't really have a lot of data. It's only those with that had COVID and long COVID syndrome, which induces chronic fatigue, and we've shown beneficial effects there. But in someone, I'm assuming without COVID, having chronic fatigue, there might be some underlying issue or factor that we're not sure of. Could creatine, I would use the word cautiously potential. it might cause some beneficial effects there, but the etiology of what's causing the fatigue needs to be ironed out first.
Absolutely. Someone else writes, I was doing well with mixing my creatine into yogurt to mitigate rumble tummy, but after several days, it starts
Okay.
again. And that's at no more than 2 grams. I've tried
Okay.
different brands, both monohydrate and
Yeah.
HCl, and it stops as soon as I stop the creatine.
Mm.
Thoughts on the available gummies and any stomach related issues that gummy or
Mm.
caplet may improve versus the powder?
That one's interesting because we usually recommend to consume it with food for those people who get any GI tract issues.
Yeah.
The theory, remember, creatine is taking water through the GI tract as well, so that could be one of the main causes. But if it's causing the person to not take creatine, then they can sort of take it up in a really small micro dosing. If she's down to 2 grams, the lowest dose around 1 has been shown multiple times a day. So you could even try to sort of get your body used to it, maybe 1 gram. But if 1 gram is causing any adverse effects, then my question is maybe that individual has IBS or Crohn's or something, because that's 1/10 of a teaspoon. That amount should not have any issues whatsoever. I was expecting the dose to be a lot higher than even
Yeah.
2.
Yeah.
So that's a unique case, and that would take medical guidance or practitioner advice for sure.
Is it contraindicated for those with IBS or Crohn's?
No, the other way. It actually has some anti-inflammatory effects. A really
Right.
good paper by Theo Wallyman put it out there. So in her case, there's something else likely
Yeah.
that's causing it for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. And isn't that the case so often? It's just
Yes.
like there's just so many,
Mhm.
things. There's so many pathways that we have to
Yeah.
figure out what's causing the actual thing that we're going
Yes.
through that
Yep.
it sometimes we just blame one thing.
Yeah.
Actually,
Exactly.
I would like to ask you this because my dad,
Yeah.
I told him I'd ask. He's like, I took that stuff. That's my 85-year-old dad. I took
Yeah.
that stuff and then I got dizzy
Okay.
and
Yeah.
then I stopped taking it and then I
Yep.
wasn't dizzy. I'm like, Dad,
Mhm.
it could have been that you just had a virus that day, but
Yes. Yeah.
have you heard of this?
I've heard of people say they get a little jittery or a little anxious. And the interesting thing with creatine, it actually will cause more glucose to get metabolized or taken up into the muscle. That's why there's a lot of promise in type 2 diabetes. So creatine can actually influence glucose kinetics a little bit. Usually those individuals may have taken creatine on an empty stomach. They're not used to it. Exercise, dehydration. A lot of times people don't drink enough water, or so there's a
Mhm.
lot of factors. But again, if in your dad's case, I'd encourage him to sort of, what's the dose? When are
Mhm.
you taking it? And the first thing that comes to mind is maybe tell him to take it with food and
Mhm.
then see how he feels over time. We usually only hear the dizziness is when they take it in water or on an empty stomach and they're not really paying attention to diet. I usually don't hear that very often if they put it in cereal or yogurt or anything
Yeah.
like that. Yeah.
Well, I bet he was putting it in his morning coffee. So double
There you
dose
go.
of
Yeah.
caffeine.
And that's the area we hear it the most. People say, whoa, I get GI tract irritation on caffeine and creatine. And I do feel, caffeine's an adenosine antagonist, and creatine can have actually adenosine upregulation for sleep. So we're starting to see some interference potential in other areas. Yeah.
Do all your favorite people in your life take it?
They do. I try to convince my wife a lot. She'll take it periodically, but I'm trying a little bit more. But I try to promote it as much as possible for sure. But I take it. Yeah, I haven't
Good.
given it to our French bulldog yet. She's getting older, about 10 years of age. But I'll look to see if there's any transporters in her, and
Sure.
I give it to her. Yeah, for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Anything interesting coming up? I know last year
Mhm.
I asked you that question and you had said that there was a study coming up in perimenopausal women. Was that study published yet?
Yeah, Abby Smith Ryan out of University of North
Yeah.
Carolina is sort of leading those areas specifically. And I think the biggest areas coming out of our lab as well, in addition to the perimenopause, we're starting to look at a lot of things we talked about. Is a bolus dose different than microdosing? So we have
Yeah.
6 studies, and the results are coming out really shortly to say, can you take smaller dosages compared to one larger dose? Is there any difference? So, for example, if you want to take 5 grams a day or 2 by 2.5 gram dosages,
Hmm.
is that better for absorption? Is it easier, more tolerable? I think those are the areas. The big ones from a global perspective, pregnancy, the anti-cancer properties. I'm really hoping around and very interested. I've been to a few business conferences. Can a technology finally get creatine stable and liquid? That would be a game changer from a global perspective.
Mhm.
It would be so easy to just drink your creatine.
Mhm.
So at a business conference in San Diego, there's a lot of interest or hope that some technology down the road, and then some other delivery aspects to get more people to consume creatine. It was estimated about 35 million people currently take it, and the goal is to get to
Okay.
350 million in 10 years. And I
Wow.
think that's due to a lot of the health applications. Yeah.
Well, they have come up with a clear protein. So,
Yeah.
I just saw that out with Legion.
Yeah.
So no doubt they'll find a way to make that happen
And
with
that would
them.
be a game changer because
Mhm.
then you could drink it in the car. I
Yeah.
mean, eventually, I'm sure some advancement in technology, if with everything that's going on, that'll eventually be able to put something around the molecule to make it intact. It gets through our stomach, okay, but if it can be stable and liquid on a shelf and you could grab it and drink it, I think that would be a global game changer. No company's been able to do it yet, but I'm sure in a decade or so it'll be interesting. Yeah.
I've been taking 5 grams for the past almost 3 years. Should I
Okay.
should I go to 10 grams?
Oh yeah, yeah, for sure. In your case where you're exercising, female for bone health, I think 5 grams you've saturated. Now, the cool thing is a little bit would be going to your bone, immune system, and brain, but I think you could easily double that. We're not seeing any adverse effects of anything from a brain perspective. That seems to be the best lines of evidence, a higher dose. And I think you would take your 5 grams in the morning or whatever it is, and 5 grams later. So I'm very boring. I'll put 5 grams in my high protein Greek yogurt, but I
Yeah,
actually
same.
put 5 grams in my water bottle and drink it during my workout. Since creatine's flavorless, or actually some of these sticks now are lemon lime or whichever,
Mhm.
I'll drink it. So there's an easy way to get 10 grams. If I can, I'll take a few gummies. I'll take 5 grams a little bit later on, especially when I'm training more rigorously.
Mhm.
But I find, the 10 grams is my baseline now. I'm not saying everybody needs to. If you're
Mhm.
only taking creatine from a muscle perspective, please note you can take 3 to 5 grams a day. That'll definitely give you all the muscle benefits. For bone, it seems to be a minimum of 8 grams with exercise, and then the brain we even think needs more. So when I did the math, 10 grams seems to be an average daily dose. Again, we don't know if a bolus is better than smaller dosages. I think whatever works for you to take it consistently. But if you
Mhm.
say, Darren, I'm not going to listen to you, I'm going to take 5 grams the rest of my life, you're still going to get substantial benefits. Yeah.
Yeah. And even if you don't take it,
Mhm.
I mean, the majority of the world isn't taking it right now.
Yeah.
So don't feel like you have to,
Yeah.
but I mean, given all the benefits, I
Yeah.
don't,
And that's a
I
really important thing. So vegans who are not consuming any creatine, they're only producing maybe 1 to 3 grams a day in their liver and brain, have phenomenal exercise benefits. They can, there's no adverse effects. So it's not an essential nutrient. Some argue it's conditionally essential, but keep in mind the vegans are really good. They have a lot of health benefits and they can exercise, but the evidence is suggesting a little bit more if you can consider it is beneficial. It's tough to get through the diet, the dose we think can provide global whole body benefits. That's why supplementation can be considered. Make third party tested. It's vegan based. It comes from a reputable source.
yeah.
Allschem is the world's leader, has GRAS status there. Focus on monohydrate. The timing is not really that important. You can take it at any time of the day that's consistent. But the
Mhm.
new thing is we'd like you to take it every day. There was a
Yeah,
question where, what if I just take it on the days we work out?
right.
I think it's good to get into a daily now for the brain. I think if it is going to your muscle on the days you're not working out, hopefully you're working out or doing something every day. But on the days people say, you know what, I'm only going to take it 3 days a week, I'd like you to consider taking it every day for those that are willing to supplement.
And I know you said we could split the dose, but someone did ask, can we put it in our water bottle and sip on it throughout the day?
Yes, you can. Yeah, it's in liquid, it will degrade, but that only takes days at certain temperatures. So if you put in your
Okay.
water bottle and have a sip, just like you're drinking it on a computer, that's totally fine. Yeah. People do dry scoop. Creatine is osmotic, it likes water. There's enough water in your GI tract, so that's fine. But if you can put it with fluid, that's a little bit better. But I have heard people say I'm very susceptible to bloating or water retention. When I dry scoop, I don't get that. So again, it's fine, whichever you like to do, whatever's consistent.
Okay, I've never heard of that. Do they
Yep.
literally just put a scoop of dry stuff in their mouth and try to swallow it?
They can. A lot of people do that. It's so easy. They don't have to worry about mixing.
Wow.
There's enough plasma and water in the GI tract. Now, it's going to take water. So the only downfall I hear often is people say, oh, dry scooping gives me a little bit of GI tract irritation. When I put it in fluid, it doesn't. So whatever works for the person. Yeah.
I think that's all my questions. So that's
Okay. Awesome.
amazing. Thank you so much for joining us
Yeah.
again. Yeah, definitely anytime I make a post, there's so
Okay.
many questions and now I have so many answers and then I'll just
Great.
say, go listen to the podcast.
Okay. Perfect. Thanks so much for having me. It's great. Yeah.
Thanks again. All
Okay.
right, everyone. Thanks for listening. And as always, go move daily in your fitness, wellness, and nutrition. You can follow Darren actually over on social media. Darren, what's your handle on Instagram there?
It's at Dr. Darren Candow on Instagram. Yeah.
Yeah, and he posts so many things and such great information. So go follow him over there. And we'll see you all in the next Move Daily Talks.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much, sir.